I'm ready. Hello everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Electronic Journeys. I, Jeffrey Hoke, will be your host as we explore the riches contained throughout the history of that art form which we all so cherish and love, video games. Each episode will highlight a single game that I believe worthy of being canonized for all posterity, a sort of criterion collection for video games, if you will. You don't have to. My selection criteria is quite flexible. Some games will be featured for their historical importance, others for their uniqueness, and still others for simply being excellently designed. There will be selections that are purely personal, perhaps games I was exposed to as a child that have had some sort of impact on me that can't be fully explained. And there will be selections that are purely impersonal, games that may have had an immense mechanical influence in genres that I haven't particularly immersed myself in as of yet, for example. I will do my best to spread the love equally across console, computer, and arcade, with the only hard rule being that each featured game must be at least 20 years old, and even that rule I may occasionally break if the mood strikes. So that's my pitch for the series. I hope it sounds interesting, and I doubly hope that you will enjoy, or at least get something, out of watching Electronic Journeys. For our very first game, we will be talking about the classic 2.5D platformer風のKlonoa, Door to Phantomile, known as just Klonoa, Door to Phantomile in the West. Developed and published by Namco and originally released in late 1997 in Japan for the Sony PlayStation. Let's dive in. Klonoa Door to Phantomile, as just mentioned, is a 2.5D platformer. Sounds a bit strange, I know. What is a 0.5D? Allow me to explain. 2.5D platformers are a subgenre of irregular side-scrolling platformers that came about in the early years of 3D console gaming. They feature varying amounts of 3D graphical and mechanical elements added into the standard side-scrolling mix. A typical way the 0.5D manifests is that while the player character's general movement plane, up, down, left, and right, is constrained by those lowly first two dimensions, some, most, or all of the graphics are rendered, utilizing that glorious third. This allows for winding pathways, intuitive background and foreground interactions, and denser, more believable level geometry than you would see in a typical 3-1D platformer. And no game in this briefly cutting-edge-ish genre has utilized these enhancement possibilities to greater effect than Klonoa, a game in which you play as a cat-slash-rabbit boy sporting a nifty blue baseball cap with an image of Pac-Man on it. Very cute, Namco. The first thing you see upon booting up Klonoa is an FMV featuring the titular protagonist discovering a magical ring in the woods, and this magical ring houses the spirit of an adorable little blue ball boy. Immediately after comes the greatest title screen in gaming history. The name of the game comes flying in to the beat of some truly joyous music. Who could this unknown Wahoo speaker be? If you guessed the character whose name is currently covering about a third of the total screen space before you, you would be correct. After naming your file and setting some preliminary options, the game begins. Its opening cutscene unexpectedly eschewing the heretofore joyful tone. It suggests that the entire game you're about to experience is a dream that occurred long in the past that our character now is fondly remembering. Interesting. We then see an elongated version of the opening cinematic, followed by a dream sequence involving a mysterious object crash landing on a nearby mountain. Our heroes awake to find their reality mirroring said dream and decide to check it out, their decision to do so handing controller over to the player. Klonoa's controls are exceedingly simple. You can run left and right, face the foreground or background, jump, hover in the air by holding jump, and fire a wind bullet from your magical ring. That's it. The core of the game's design lies in what happens when you shoot an enemy with one of your wind bullets. They do not expire or explode like you may expect. Instead, they inflate into a gargantuan orb that Klonoa proudly carries over his head. The player then has two options on what to do with it, both of which of course result in its murder. One, the player can simply press the wind bullet button again, which throws the enemy in a straight line in whichever direction the player is facing, even the foreground or background. Or two, the player can utilize the enemy for a single-use double jump, plunging it speedily downward to an unfortunate fate below. To say that Klonoa's design gets a lot of mileage out of its moveset's simple double jump, no double jump state switching is a massive understatement. It's practically what the entire game is built around. And the game is really, really good, so there you have it. Anyway, as you move forward into the game's first level, you soon see what's known as a Moo, a cute little red rabbit guy that acts as this game's Goomba, the most basic of basic enemies for you to contend with. He stands amongst a scattering of green gems, which each add 1 to the gem counter on the bottom right of the screen. Use his inflated butt to hop up to the ledge above and you'll find a blue gem, which adds 5 to your gem counter. As with Mario before, a 100 total of these nets you an extra life, which, unless you are generally not very good at platformers, you are not likely to need. In fairness though, my sense of how difficult this game might be, it might be somewhat skewed. I've thought of it as being super easy for as long as I can remember, but that might be just because I've cleared it a good 20 or so times in my life. I was very surprised to find that Arino of Game Center CX failed to complete it in the 23rd season of Game Center CX, but I digress. Right after this, another red moo comes bounding down into your lane from the background. The game's very first moment of 2.5D-ness. Unless you count the slight curvature of the road you're on, which you should, I do, I definitely do. The next freshly 2.5D moment comes in the form of an egg-like object floating in the background. Its slight up and down bob and shadow casting suggests an interaction opportunity. There is one. For your astuteness, you are granted 5 gems. As you cross a gorgeously rendered bridge scene, listen to that wind, you come across a new enemy type. This one helicopters you into the air for a bit before popping of its own accord. You'll be seeing more of these later, and you will not always have a bridge under you to catch your fall. Across the bridge are 2 new things. Another enemy, this one a purple fella who is essentially a speedier moo, and a strange bubble with a symbol inside of it. Pop the bubble and you have just rescued your very first captured villager. As you can see from the little jigsaw puzzle type graphic next to your gem counter, there are 6 hidden in each level. Around the cliff, you'll find the first mandatory to progress double jump in the game, and also a floating heart with wings, collecting which restores a single point to your health meter, represented as 3 large hearts in the bottom center of the screen. Taking damage in Klonoa costs half a heart, which means you have in total a whopping 6 health points, a virtual boatload compared to most other games in the genre. Point in favor of the game actually being easy, I suppose. Another embubbled item lies ahead, a clock which grants you a checkpoint. Then the level direction switches to the left as you climb up the cliffside. Yes, not only does this game feature an extra 0.5D, you also go to the left sometimes. A fun Klonoa lifting tornado and gem-directed leap of faith later, you discover a slippery hill that rockets you helplessly down into yet another new enemy type. Purple like the last, but these ones hop joyfully about. Inside the tower, you meet Baloo, the first of many helpful NPCs that propel the story along. Baloo is a goofy stoneworker who carved the statue of the goddess Laphise you passed under earlier. He tells you she sings the Song of Rebirth, whatever that is, it's important, and that he is currently building a tower to attempt to reach the Moon Kingdom, because he believes that to be where Laphise lives. Hupo doubts this. Oh yeah, your blue buddy guy's name is, his name's Hupo. This makes Baloo very mad, but don't sweat it. You don't see him again until the end of the game, and by then he's gotten over it. Outside the tower, green flying moos are introduced, which end up being one of the game's more popular enemy varieties. And just after that is our very first branching path. Double jumping up to the scaffolding above takes the player to an ascending road that introduces an indestructible metal spike type enemy, a golden heart that restores 3 hit points instead of only 1, and an extra life token. Not bad for an optional side road. Falling back to the road below after collecting the token, while disorienting at first, is an important moment in teaching the players the rules of Klonoa's level designs. These are not perfectly straightforward linear spaces. You'll have to make navigation decisions on this adventure, risk missing things of importance, and sometimes even double back. It is emblematic of Klonoa's design clarity that this lesson is included in the very first level. Back on the main road, you discover a third bubble type to burst. These contain fairies that temporarily make your gem collections worth double. Completionists take note that each stage in Klonoa offers an optional challenge to try and collect 150 or more gems in it. To do so, in almost every case, there is a specific requirement of certain gems that need to be collected while powered up by these 2 X-Gem fairies, which creates interesting little side puzzles to solve for you thinking types. Hop your way over a few more crisscrossing scaffolds, enter the cave there, and you'll earn the Vision 1-1 Cleared title card. The game then boots you out into a storybook world map, counts up your rescued villagers, and plays you a little song to celebrate. After which, you may save. Spelled out like I just have here, it would seem an enormous amount of information was contained in the few brief minutes that first level took to complete, but in practice, Klonoa reveals itself to its players with the deliberate delicacy of the very best corporate feedback givers. Stage, or I suppose I should say Vision 1-2, starts off inside the now seen to be tranquilly sparkling cave. As a brief aside, I'd like to mention how much I love these little title cards that open each vision. They're so unnecessarily epic, detailing not only the stage's numeric value, but also an artful book chapter-esque title for it. They even include its setting. Vision 1-2, the diva and the dark spirit, Gunsten Mine. This narrative technique evokes a literary call to adventure greater than pretty much any other side-scroller I've ever played. And in my experience, its effect across multiple playthroughs never seems to lessen. It's always, I don't know, it always makes you feel like you're just across the first pit of the stage is our 7th enemy type, Yellow Moos with shields. Firing a wind bullet into their protected front side has no effect on them. They must be dealt with from behind. One of the recurring elements of Vision 1-2 are these vertical wind columns that carry you, and some leaves, upward as you pass through their current. Make use of them, and soon you arrive at an egg very similar to the one you encountered in the first stage, only this one's in the foreground. This game's not just 2.5D, it's very 2.5D. One genre-required minecart ride later, we're back outside. The playful flute melody from Vision 1-1 returns. The path then splits as it does in the first stage, only this time a little more complicatedly, as the side path also contains a bonus room containing an optional challenge to earn yourself some gems and a villager. As you return to the main road, storm clouds cast the environment in foreboding shadow and it begins to rain. At the end is another cave entrance and 4 gems laid out in a very suspicious pattern. Equally suspicious is that shadow on the ground, because gems don't have shadows. Hopping into the center of the gem arrangement reveals another egg. Oh, so these eggs come in the hidden variety as well. Inside the cave is a new enemy type, a sort of adorably nightmarish bunny type thing that grotesquely distends itself before slamming to the ground and firing out spiked balls from some unseen orifice I'm gonna try not to think about. A smattering of gems and an extra life token call out to you from an unreachable background pillar. You yearn for them. Luckily for you, the bottom path of the next fork in the road winds you around in a circle directly to them. What happens next may blow your mind. You might initially think, oh, dead end. I guess I have to go back the way I came. But you'd be wrong. Jump rightward and downward onto the path previously treaded, and as soon as your feet hit the ground, the game system updates the 2-dimensional plane Klonoa is operating within, the foreground becoming the left direction and the background the right, just as before. Never has a side-scroller felt so perpendicular. Anyways, a bridge-making moment of environmental interactivity follows, and we've finally reached the summit of Bell Hill. There, a shady figure named Gaudius and his lackey Joka loom over the incapacitated body of the real-life Laphise. Gaudius reveals his plan to stop her from singing the Song of Rebirth, whatever that is. It's important. He wants none of that rebirth nonsense. He wants to destroy the world instead. They search Laphise for a pendant of some sort, but it seems to be missing. Gaudius then notices Klonoa and Hupo, flees with Laphise, and leaves the task of murdering us to Joka, which he attempts by sending some sort of corrupted demon pet thing after us. This plan is known colloquially as a boss fight, and it does not work. It does not work because the boss fight is extremely easy. Even more, it begins by Joka being a dingus and directly telling us the boss's weak point. And even if he didn't do that, its weak point shimmers in an obvious target-like manner for literally the entire fight. And even if it didn't do that, its weak point is its entire back. Only one of 2 possible directions you could even hit it from. After your inevitable victory, Joka flees, accidentally revealing the pendant that they were looking for was stashed inside the bell all along. Klonoa asks his grandpa what in the heck this pendant business is all about, and Gramps says it's the crest of the Moon Kingdom. He sends Klonoa on a mission into Fourlock Forest to tell their elder, very creatively named Granny, about the events that have just transpired, and so we head out to learn more about these mysterious goings-on. Vision 2-1 takes place in the dark and withering Fourlock Forest, and it starts off by introducing a more difficult variant of the shielded Yellow Moo. Black Moos with spiked shields, the sharp protrusion of which makes them marginally more difficult to jump over and reach their backs. Right after that is another new enemy type, metal ball-looking fellas that bounce to and fro and are only vulnerable when they stop to peek around. And right around the corner from that is, maybe you can guess what I'm gonna say here, is yet another new enemy type. This one is a cannon-headed twerp, who whiles the day away raining spike balls down on innocent passers-by from tactically advantageous positions. If you haven't noticed by now, Klonoa is amazingly generous with both the speed and frequency at which it rolls out new mechanisms and enemy types. I don't think I truly ever noticed it myself until I started going over the footage to write this script, but wow, it's relentless. And guess what? I'm not even done, because around the next corner, you find not only the same cannon-headed dude who was previously unreachable in the background, but a fourth new enemy type in, what, about a minute? This monkeyish little guy doesn't even attack you, he just swings merrily back and forth from a vine, enjoying his monkeyish life. I almost feel bad for him when I inflate him into a beach-balled version of himself and slam his monkeyish corpse into the ground just to reach a couple of gems I could have easily accessed in other ways. The leaves in the forest are bigger than those in the previous level's cave, so you can use them as platforms to get across an extra wide gap. And what do you find over there? A giant red moo. Shooting this guy with a wind bullet results in him inflating into an orb like all the other enemies, but this orb is simply too big to carry over your head for future double jumping purposes. If you are disappointed by this new inflated enemy experience's lack of heights reaching utility, don't be. You can hop up on top and use them as temporary platforms, an iterative mechanical take on the same core design concept. That's pretty good. If you're still disappointed, don't be. You can also pop these enemy behemoths by tossing another enemy into them for a veritable bevy of gems. Inside what I believe to be a large hollowed out tree is an even more intricate intersection of 2D planes than what blew our minds previously. And beyond that, a locked door with the image of a key on it. Is this going to become an adventure game? No. Backtracking a single step triggers a cutscene in which a forest villager introduces the key mechanic. Find a door with a key pictured on it, find a key to open it. One key, one door. Zelda rules. I love how the doors open in this game, how they swing slightly inward before opening outward, and that glorious creak. A bit later, we discover a pair of egg containers, one of which is orbiting the other. You will probably miss these ones on your first try. I know I usually do, and guess where the key for the next door is hidden? Inside an egg. Truly insidious. The next screen is cool because it features more swinging monkeys, but these ones go from foreground to background and vice versa. I'm not sure why this moment in the game always strikes me the way it does. It's like the developers took every chance they could to remind you that Klonoa exists in a 3D space, despite his 2D sprite existence. I love it. Spiraling up and around a massive mushroom backdrop, you eventually reach a dried out log flume type deal that was supposed to be your ride to Granny's house. Then the cutest, most baby-looking quote-unquote soldier ever hops out to tell you that the trees are all withered and there's no way to progress any further. His voice nearly as adorable as his little waving baby arms. He accidentally lets out that the kingdom he's from, Jugpot, is having monarch problems. Then says, and I quote, "It's not safe out here, so little kitties should go home." Strange words for a hopping baby man to be bandying about, if you ask me. So much like the player themselves, neither Klonoa nor Hupo take the obviously projecting soldier toddler's warning very seriously, and they immediately head to Jugpot to investigate its king situation. For perhaps it is that the foul influence of Gaudius has already taken hold there. Vision 2-2 begins with our heroes well on their way to the kingdom of Jugpot, which is a moment of the game that has always stood out to me. The narrative decision to not have the vision pairs fall cleanly into setting or theme groups like for example, the Act 1s and 2s of Sonic the Hedgehog, that decision is one I've always admired. I mean, for the most part they do, but this slight deviation away from the standard structural formula of linear platforming games in service of a more distinct narrative focus is one of the little touches that gives Klonoa its immersive heft, the feeling that this is a world and story that we are experiencing as it truly is and happening, and not mere contrivances of a programmed game system. On our way to Jugpot, the first obstacle we come across is a strange green rounded platform that looks something like a cross between a jug and a pot. A bit on the nose maybe, but there we are. Beyond the pot jug, a water geyser shoots us up to a higher level. One thing I love about these water geysers is that if you bump into the stream, Klonoa recoils like he's taking damage, but it doesn't actually harm him. After all, why would merely getting sprayed with a little water hurt our vigorous hero? He has 6 health points for goodness sake. It's another small, easily overlooked touch that nevertheless helps establish this as a believable world that behaves intuitively. Above the geyser, we encounter a new spiked ball emitting enemy variety. We then glide over an arch of water into a cutscene. It seems that the waterfall that is responsible for feeding Granny's forest is flowing gravity-defyingly backward. It's our first sign that trouble's afoot. We make our way up the waterfall via a pathway of rocks jutting out from behind its surface and past a new fish-type enemy who likes to repeatedly hop up and down between platforms. Behind the waterfall awaits a sprawling cave where we are formally introduced to one of my favorite mechanical concepts in the game, sloped ceilings. Up until this point in the game, it has been established many times over that there are certain gaps that are too narrow for you to carry an enemy through. But interestingly, that is not always the case. If the rooftop leading into the gap is angled in just the right way, the roof will instead slowly compress the enemy down flatter and flatter until ultimately it allows you to squeeze through the gap with them. Furthermore, these sloped roofs typically are one way only, allowing you to take enemies through them in one direction, but not the reverse. This idea is used to create obstacles that are slightly more puzzly in nature, engaging the brain a bit in addition to those thumbs. The real beauty of this mechanism, however, why I like it so much, is in its implementation. Something similar could have been accomplished in any number of contrived ways, but instead Klonoa's developers opted to weave it into the physical geometry of its stage architecture, so no additional signposting or explanations are needed. It's yet another little detail that goes a long way in furthering the game's immersive quality, and makes the rules of its world feel like matter-of-fact realities as opposed to constructs of an arbitrary design framework. Back outside the cave, we've arrived at Jugpot proper, as indicated by a cool seashell building in the background, a small hanging garden, and a tastefully decorated pink brick road. Hop your way over some large spike balls and some tiny platforms, and soon you'll be inside a great jug/pot skyscraper. Through it you go, and down a massive water slide, praying you don't miss any of these one-chance gems. At the bottom you discover that giant moves come in yellow shield types as well. A second water slide and a second finger crossing follows. Outside once again, you discover a bejeweled fish child who beckons you to rescue them from their cagey imprisonment. It's here that I'd like to point out that Klonoa's design approach is an absolute masterclass in how to teach players to play a game without explicitly using tutorials. The fish child pleads, "Someone please push the switch!" and the game simply cannot progress until the player does exactly that. These switches become a prominent mechanic in future levels, and to introduce them in a failure-free way with a mandatory narrative underpinning practically guarantees their utility sticking to the player's gamer brain. The next time you see one, you will think to yourself, I should push that switch. Switch pushed, the fish introduces itself as Carol, and pleads with you to save its mother. Klonoa and Hupo assume Gaudius has her under an evil spell. Carol, what should I say? Carol, I'm going with Carol. Carol takes you to Jugpot's castle, where you discover that it ain't just Carol's mommy under a spell, but King Seedoff as well. Klonoa resolves himself to take care of this little spell situation the only way he knows how, by boss fighting it out of them. This one is significantly trickier than the first, but really not too hard at all. Avoid the balls and the bubbles, wait for Seedoff to hover vulnerably over the center gap and nab him with a wind bullet. Then chuck his engorged body into Carol's mom's face as she dives at you. Afterward, Joker reveals that he was watching the fight from the shadows and chastises Seedoff for being a weakling. Klonoa shoots him in the face and he plummets to his doom. If only. Seedoff worries aloud that Gaudius might be plotting something against the Moon Kingdom, and corroborates Klonoa's grandpa's claim that Forlock Forest's granny is an expert in such matters, which would explain why she's being targeted. Seedoff sets the waterfall right again to re-irrigate the forest, and Carol returns, thanks you for saving its mother, and offers to give you a ride back to Grannyland. Aesthetically, the opening sequence of Vision 3-1 is one of my favorites in the game. As soon as you start down its first path, you can already see the corrected water flow working its magic. The previously brown, dour forest you were exploring is now a lush green, and plant life springs to vibrant verticality all around you. And man, that music, maybe the best track in the game. I love we're gonna layer the music over this part. Whatever that instrument is, playing those intervals or chords or whatever they are, it just sounds awesome. I'm gonna layer the music over that. All right, anyways. One mechanic in Klonoa, perhaps the only mechanic in Klonoa I don't ever seem to be able to get the hang of fully, are these darn spring platforms that you encounter early on in this stage. They kinda automatically hop you up in the air a little bit at regular intervals, so if you press jump at the wrong time, you end up unwantedly doing the hover move because you're ever so slightly in the air. I think you're supposed to jump when the spring is compressed downward, which makes logical sense, but For some reason, the exact timing on how to do this continues to elude me even after I've played this game a million times, I don't know. Next, the game introduces two new concepts back to back. Armored moos, who are invulnerable to attack until you toss an enemy into them to break off their armor, and boxes, which can be smashed open to reveal gems and passageways. Past one of them is a tied-up forest villager, who activates the gondola into the village upon being rescued. Meanwhile, Joka watches from above and tasks some of his underlings with hiding a key that we will need to progress. On the way back to the gondola, a new enemy accosts us, the jumping shielded moo. Going under them as they spring upward is the easiest way to reach the backs of these guys. Up one gondola and across another, we find the aforementioned key hiding in an egg. Well, that was easy, they didn't hide it very well, did they? Through the locked door is another gondola, which takes us to a network of tree paths and another locked door. Deal with the obnoxious armored trio and smash the box stacked up in the background to drop a second on the pathway behind. Inside that box is the key. I love how this game never repeats a trick. They already hid one key in an egg, so now it's gotta be a box. Where's the next key gonna be? I can hardly wait. Further along the stage, we come across a suspicious, closed-up flower in the foreground. Our intuition is rewarded, and a villager is rescued. We climb up to a wooden bridge, where we discover that giant moos can be armored too. Not a problem, it still only takes a single thrown enemy to reveal their fleshy weakness. To answer a question I put forward just a moment ago, the next key is in a gazebo down a side path that can only be reached via double jump. And through its related door is another minecart level-esque sequence where we attempt to avoid spiky death as we collect those lovely gems. Outside, we come across another gondola. This one has been switched off. That's right, the lesson our fish friend Carol taught us at the end of 2-2 is already paying off. And this one's long distance. Shuck an enemy at it, we don't have all day. At the end of the path, we run into another Forlockian who pleads with us to save Granny and rid her house of baddies. He motions us onto a rickety wooden saucer and unceremoniously tosses us through a hole in her roof as Klonoa lets out a comically pitiful scream. Vision cleared. We crash land inside the tree mansion of machinery, as the game calls it, and are immediately greeted with a new enemy type, boomies, which behave much like regular moos, except they don't burst when dropped or thrown. Instead, they violently explode on their own after a preset interval, usually a few seconds or so, regardless of what you do with them, even if you don't touch them. In another moment of hidden tutorial genius, the game teaches you how to use boomies by placing a mandatory to progress switch out of reach at the bottom of an alcove in the background. The only way to access said switch is to toss a boomie through a hole in the fence above it and have it fall down next to the switch. By doing so, you learn both that boomies do not pop when they are thrown, and also that their explosions can flip switches, even if they don't hit them directly. That's a lot of learning for the first 10 seconds of a new stage. Vision 3-2 is the first stage where the non-linearity hinted at in the previous 5 becomes front and center as a core design element. Riding the mallet-activated wooden platform across the stage in a loop reveals no less than 4 doorways to go through, and just listen to these glorious sound effects. The echo effect on that last one is nothing short of magnificent. Of course, this is a relatively simple game aimed at a relatively young audience. So 2 of the doors are dead ends and the other 2 lead to the same place, an inactive elevator holding a key. Grab it and backtrack to one of the previous dead ends to progress outside. After a bit of tricky platforming, you'll come across a switch that makes the other dead end less dead as well. Down this newly opened pathway is Joka, who is up to his same old door-locking tricks. Follow him past some new, rather unremarkable flying enemies and into a room with a switch and a locked door. Now you might be thinking, a switch and a door seems pretty clear, but it's not that easy. You see, this is one of those newfangled timed switches, and if you shoot it with a wind bullet, you simply won't have enough time to reach the door before it closes. Luckily, there are a couple of boomies loitering around, so you can snag one of those, chuck it under the switch, run back to the door, and wait for the boomie to do its thing. Inside the door, Joka taunts us from on high, claiming that we will never be able to reach him at such a ludicrous height. Little does he know, another hidden tutorial is going to show us exactly how to do that. Introducing the double jump. Grab an enemy, double jump with it, then grab another enemy while you're still in the air and double jump again. But it doesn't end there. This trick can be done any number of times. In fact, with a steady supply of airborne enemies within reach, you could theoretically double jump forever. The real Klonoa starts here. When you inevitably reach him, Joka panics and drops the key he so gloatingly lorded over us before. The door it opens leads to a curious room with 3 switches. Another puzzle, you may think. Hardly. If you're anything like me, the correct combination to press them in is likely the second one you'll try after 1, 2, 3. In any case, upon activating the 3 switches, a gear in the background begins to turn, and it is revealed that the inactive elevator we visited earlier is now less so. Our backtracking to it is mostly uneventful, but I do always like quickly going through this door before the camera finishes panning over, so Klonoa kind of goes through it at an odd angle. You know, sometimes it's the little things in these games I've played dozens of times that stand out to me the most. Back at the elevator, we ride it up to a series of conveyor belts and rotating pillars. By the way, you can totally run a circle all the way around these pillars, but there's nothing back there, which I always thought was a bit of a missed opportunity. Continue climbing through the machinery and up a spiraling spiked ball death road, and you'll eventually reach the elevator to the top. Joka awaits there, and you interrupt him mid-granny interrogation, who is rather admirably holding her tongue. The frustrated Joka unleashes another of his boss fight pets on us, and much like the first boss, inadvertently drops a direct hint as to their weak point. What a dweeb. This boss fight is a sort of metallic Venus flytrap with an opening to its vulnerable interior only accessible from above. It is now that we are reminded in the case of our forgetting that the enemy-powered double jump that we've grown rather accustomed to over the course of the game can also be used as an attack. Hop on a spring, launch yourself in the air as the boss passes underneath, and fire an enemy down into its innards. A few bullseyes and it's toast. Klonoa and Hupo free Granny, who informs us that according to legend, the Moon Pendant is the key to the Moon Kingdom, and that the pathway to it lies inside some place called the Temple of the Sun. Granny asks where the pendant is. Klonoa mentions that he left it with his grandpa. Joka reveals himself to have been eavesdropping from the shadows and flies off toward Grandpa Klonoa's, cackling portentously. Granny informs us as to a shortcut back to the Wind Village, but warns of its danger. Throwing caution to the pun-necessitating wind, Klonoa sprints away in hopes of heading off Joka. Vision 4-1 starts off outside some dreary-looking ruins, and as we head into them, we soon run into a new metal spike armored enemy type that, much like the previous stage's boss, is only vulnerable from directly above. This is one of my favorite examples of Klonoa's design elegance, so let's walk through it by first going back a bit. In the cutscene prior to the boss fight in Vision 1-2, Joka inadvertently informs the player of the enemy's weak point. Later, he makes the same mistake before the boss fight of 3-2, which establishes this proclivity of his as an intentional character defect by the game's writers. But it's not just a character defect that exists within the game's cutscenes, because in both cases it provides mechanical utility to the player. It's a dual-purpose narrative mechanical device that serves to provide some color to Joka's character, but also functions as one of those hidden tutorials that, at this point, the entire game practically seems built around. Going beyond that, however, where the real design elegance comes in, is how the tutorial is not just for a one-off gimmick for that particular boss fight, but a general mechanical concept that the designers can, and do, immediately begin iterating on at the beginning of the very next stage. And it doesn't end there either, because the design of this particular enemy type, which was informed by the previous stage's boss fight, will continue to inform the design of future enemy types we haven't been introduced to yet, and so on until the credits roll. A typical game's boss fights are unique challenges that serve to test the culmination of a player's skill up to that point, but Klonoa takes this design philosophy further, and treats them also as opportunities to artfully introduce new concepts to the player that serve as additional links to an elaborately interlocking chain of interactive design that is fed to the player so subtly they never even realize they're being so deliberately taught. It's awesome. Anyways, past the inspiration of my lecture, the path climbs upward until we get to a doorway leading inside the ruins. Across a gap to the left of this is a strange sculpture with a hole in the wall just above it. We hop over to the sculpture, tap up on the controller, and discover that this hole is not just for looks. Another, wow, this game world feels real moment. For me at least. Through the main doorway, we discover that our design lecture's inspiration also comes in giant form, and we deal with it accordingly. Back outside, the game introduces us to gun jerks, name unofficial, who are only vulnerable between firing off rounds of bullets. The sharp-toothed smiles they display while showing their faces always reminds me of something I can't quite put my finger on, and it makes me feel a type of way I can only describe as indescribable. Across what I believe is the longest gap in the game up until this point is a door that leads back inside the ruins. You know, one of the ways this game stays fresh and inviting is by regularly changing the environment you're platforming across. You're never in just like a field or whatever hopping around. It's always across a bridge, then through a cave, then back outside, then back inside, then back outside, and so forth. I like that. It feels like a proper adventure. Inside, things take a turn for the spooky. Two not at all cute ghost enemies approach you in a spooky pincer attack, and just beyond them is a spooky fire wizard fella who looks like a blue squirrel clinging to a floating crystal ball. These gents surround themselves with a rotating shield of fire and can be taken out one of two ways. One, wait for the fire ring to shrink and take them out by dropping an enemy on them from above, like a further iteration of the Vision 3-2 boss. Or two, wait for the fire ring to expand, jump inside of it, then take them out from the side like any normal enemy. Options. Inside a spooky egg is a spooky extra life token, then across some spooky gaps is a spooky graveyard. Next is a blink and you'll miss it hidden tutorial on how some Jacob's Ladder-esque platforms work. Stay on them too long and they spin and you fall through, followed by a platforming challenge involving those exact platforms. Climb up to the upper part of the ruins and you'll come to the greatest swinging platforms in video game history. I'm not sure if it's the attractive aesthetic mixture of 2D ropes and 3D boxes, or the subtle yet palpable creaking sound they make as they swing, or the overlapping trajectories that allow you to cross them without ever touching the D-pad, but I love them and I savor this moment in the game every time I reach it. Truly. The road beyond leads down to a doorway of blinding white light through which lies the end of the stage. Enigmatic adventuring music and a series of slides start off Vision 4-2, and at the bottom is the entrance to a cave. Inside that is another slide, this one of the water variety. It's a lengthy one, and your hands sweat as you go down it, swearing under your breath while you try not to miss a single gem or other collectible hovering above. At the bottom, a mysterious green stone blocks our path, so we grab an enemy and toss it at it. It shatters. Mystery solved. We explore the rest of the cave, riding gusts of air upward and murdering ghosts until we reach a switch. We flip it, and a giant red stone nearby explodes for some reason, revealing an exit. The next part of the stage prominently features the skeleton of a massive creature only known as the Leviathan. We walk across its spine, slip under its spine, visit the other half of its spine, before making our way to the top of the cave. We hop across some flimsy bones embedded in an ice wall, I suppose revealing that there are more than one of these Leviathans, because I don't see how the guy down below's bones could have gotten all the way up here. Anyways, we bust out of the cave, round the corner, and there's our house. We made it. Klonoa calls out to his grandpa, who waves cheerfully back, only for Joka to show up in a flying war machine and summarily laser destroy his home only a moment later. Joka's lackey then uses a tractor beam to retrieve the moon pendant from the wreckage and flies evilly away. In a moment of narrative inspiration, the developers abruptly hand control of Klonoa back to the player with no further ceremony or explanation, leaving us stunned and bewildered. The music cuts out into silence. We can't see if Grandpa's okay. We can't see anything except the smoking husk of our home. We are left alone to process these events on our own terms and timeline. Eventually, we press onward and into one of the short, tension-building cutscenes that are placed before each boss fight, but this one feels particularly evocative compared to those that came before. We emerge onto a bridge where Joka accosts us. He mocks us, moon pendant in hand. His personality transforms from mockable to murderous in an instant. He uses two boomies to destroy the supports of the bridge we are on. The cuteness of their piggy bank-like features stand in stark contrast to the seriousness of the scene. He sends another of his bloodthirsty giant pets after us and retreats. This time, he does not dopily reveal their weak point to us, a sign of his transformation into a villain that maybe now should be taken seriously. Though undercutting all that narrative gravity is the boss fight itself, which is probably the easiest in the entire game. Pick up an enemy on the foreground swing of the bridge, dodge the easily dodgeable obstacles as it swings toward the boss, and toss the enemy into one of its easily identifiable weak points. I do like that if you aim it perfectly, you can hit 2 weak points with a single throw. It's very satisfying. I always try to take them out in just 4 hits, but you can see that I messed up my last throw here. Bah! After our victory, we rush to the scene of our destroyed home, where we find Grandpa clinging to life. He apologizes for not being able to protect the pendant, and compliments us for our strength. He refers to Klonoa as his great child of the wind, charges him with the final task of getting the moon pendant back, and then expires. Like for real, he dies. Rare to see this sort of tragedy in a rated E for everyone platforming game, but hey, I told you this game was special. Later, as Hupo and Klonoa discuss the moon pendant mission, our fish friend's mom, otherwise known as the boss of Vision 2-2, shows up out of nowhere to offer us a ride to the Temple of the Sun, because if you recall, that's rumored to be where the entrance to the Moon Kingdom lies. Understandably, Klonoa is confused by her ability to fly. Nevertheless, they agree to go, and the next stage of our journey is afoot. we get dropped off outside the Temple of the Sun and head inside, where we meet Solaire and Soleil, the custodians of the establishment. These two have a bit of a comedy duo type deal going on, where one is friendly and the other is a bit of a jerk. They inform us that the 4 colored orbs of the temple have been stolen and must be recovered to access the temple's altar. Then they take off. Vision 5.1 expands greatly upon the nonlinear design approach of Vision 3.2. It presents 4 distinct pathways to each of the 4 orbs we've been tasked with collecting. Luckily for us, however, each of the paths is clearly marked as to which orb it leads to. Solaire and Soleil perhaps left these signs out to help us? Regardless, like any rational, organized person would do, I always go after the orbs in order from left to right, and it would take a significant overhaul of my personal sense of propriety to do otherwise. In other words, the red orb is first. We take the left pathway out of the main room and hop over a lava pit where we find a door marked with the object of our desire. Entering it takes us to a fiery factory area where we have to hop across some moving platforms while knocking over some metal what-have-yous to create platforms for ourselves after we round the corner. Another nifty little 2.5D moment in a game full of them. Across these us-made platforms is the red orb and one of the most awkward fairy gem puzzles in the entire game. The next obstacle introduces gold-armored moos who require 2 hits to be made naked and vulnerable, but we can just ignore them for now and make our way over the fire spout and through the passageway back to the main room. 1 orb down. Blue is next, and we start off heading the same way as we did for red, but this time past the doorway we previously entered. Check out this little example of how natural Klonoa's 3-dimensional level geometry is. I'm able to hop over to this pathway on the left despite it being one I've already traversed, and there being no reason to go backwards simply because that's where it is. I doubt the game's developers even intended this particular jump from being possible, but that just goes to show how intuitive and advanced the 2.5D reality of this game really is. I might even go as far as to call this kind of magic 2.6D. Actually, that gives me an idea for today's Dev Pro tip. I'm calling this one, Trust Your Geometry. All right, so geometry is the reality of your game. Like you don't want to define the physical space of your game with like contrivances. Don't lie to your player with invisible barriers. If you don't want them, it's so hard to switch into unscripted mode. Think about invisible walls in old games. Everybody running into invisible walls. It's always an immersion breaking moment. You want to represent the physical space of your game, the geometry of your game as honestly to your players as possible. So let's say, for example, you don't want a player up on a certain ledge or something. You could do something contrived like, make like a little invisible wall there, and then when the player maybe later gets the double jump, they're able to double jump and then they'll be able to go past that invisible wall. But so if somehow they were to try to get up there before they got the double jump, that invisible wall would be blocking them. Like that's the type of contrivance I think just isn't good game design. What is better is to really just build geometry that, represents your game world honestly to your player. If you don't want a player up on a ledge, make it too high. Make it too high for them to get to before they find the ability that they need to get to the ledge. And if they do somehow get up there early, let them be up there early. Maybe even put like an Easter egg up there. Do something. You never know what your players are going to do in your game. But the thing I'm trying to get at is that you shouldn't have to mechanically define the geometry of your game space. You should treat the geometry of your game space just as its real physical reality of your game, and not do invisible walls or weird barriers, weird things controlling where players can and can't go. Just let your geometry speak for itself. Geometrical reliance simplifies. It simplifies the player's experience with your game. Mechanical reliance, it complicates. You have to have more rules, you have to have more gates, you have to have more flags that you're keeping track of the state of your game. Here's a great example. Look at the cover system in modern shooters. In Gears of War, you have all these mechanics that define it. You have the roadie run, which snaps you to cover, and then you have mechanics for peeking over, looking down your sights, and it's defined in a very rigid way. Even how you switch from cover to cover. But then, if you look at an old first-person shooter or a shooter like Doom or whatever, you still take cover in those games. You just take cover by intuitively walking behind walls. And then if you come out to shoot, you just, strafe out from the side of the wall. Both games still have cover, But in Gears of War, it's very defined by mechanics, and in Doom, it's just, it's just something that the player does intuitively with the geometry of the game. Now, I'm not saying that Gears of War is a bad game. Actually, I think Gears of War is a very good game, but it is more complicated. It mechanically defines something that Doom already has, or all these old shooters already have, but they didn't need to mechanically define. So whenever you're thinking about geometry, in relation to your game, the game that you're designing, you should, if you want to keep things simple, you want to just use the geometry to express that space and what players can do in that space. But if you want it to be like a core mechanic, if you want to be very, very specifically like we want to encourage players to go into cover. We have all these rules around how cover works. For example, if they're behind cover, they cannot get shot, or they're 90% less likely to get shot. You can define mechanics and rules to make it very desirable to be in cover, to kind of guide players into that behavior. But geometry, it intuitively informs player behavior. And I'm not saying necessarily that one is better than the other, it depends on the game that you're making, but it's always something that should be at the forefront of your mind when you're making a game. It's like, if it can be defined strictly through geometry, maybe you don't need all these other gatekeeping rules, all these keys, all these, abilities that all they do is like let it be slightly easier to get around the map. You can just use good geometrical design to guide the player through your game. Another example is, remember when Demon's Souls came out and you could slip off of edges again? Like, that was gone for like 5+ years of games. Every 3D game just had invisible walls around even like a thin path. You just couldn't fall off. You could move your character right to the edge and then they just stop. They automatically stop, despite you, the player, specifically giving your character the instruction to run over the edge. And then Demon's Souls came out, and if you keep that analog stick pointed at the edge, your guy goes right over and you die. The geometry in Demon's Souls does not lie, and I think that was one of the main things that made that game feel so refreshing when it came out. Like, it felt like such an old school experience, that kind of brought you back to how you remember games being, because the geometry doesn't lie, it's real. The way that you push the stick and navigate with the analog stick through its world matches the geometry that the visuals are indicating to you. So it's another way that you want your geometry and the way you're representing your geometry to just, be what it actually is. Don't lie to your players. And I think it goes beyond that too, because I think if you look at old school dungeon crawlers, the old grid-based ones, those are very geometrical games, because everything is, up moves you one, down, like Dungeon Master. Up moves you one, down moves you one, left, right, up one, down one, side one. Everything's a grid, and that's like very, very, very abstract. It's very abstract to say that everything in the world cleanly maps onto a grid. But dungeon crawlers still feel immersive. They still feel, relatively unabstract. It's still a world that you feel like you can sink yourself into, despite the insane level of abstraction that comes with, literally mapping everything onto a grid. They get away with that extreme level of abstraction because it does not lie. That lack of lying and that consistency lets a player immerse themselves into the geometrical space of your game, and then all those abstractions disappear because it matches. There's a match. Where the problem is when there is that mismatch, like I said, with invisible walls, or arbitrarily limiting how high players can jump in certain rooms because they don't have certain abilities, or everything starts feeling very hoop jumpy and very like you're just going through the set of instructions that the designer has laid out for you to go through. But it doesn't need to be like that. Trust your geometry. I don't know. We have a new purple enemy type who likes to swing a spiked ball around on a string, wait for an opening, and snag him. Further down the path, we come across a moving hidden egg containing a blue gem that took me forever to find the first time I was trying to get all 150 on this stage. After that, past this annoying part where you have to clear a pathway across a fire pit in the foreground, we acquire the blue orb and soon find ourselves back in the main room where we deposit it onto its appropriate pedestal. Green. The best orb, because green is the best color. This time, we take the right passageway out and follow it until we get to a fork in the road. We choose the green pathway, obviously, but soon find ourselves at a dead end next to a switch we have no access to. Backtracking, we eventually find that we'd missed a subtle opportunity to hit the switch from earlier in the level. These foreground-background interactions are starting to get kind of tricky, huh? We hit the switch and make our way back to the door. It leads us outside to a scary fire pit we must double jump over and another switch. That switch opens a door that leads to a third switch, which opens the door forward. We head back outside and down to a tricky little segment with an army of armored moos stomping around all in the way like. Thankfully, just beyond is the green orb and we're 3/4 of the way there. Last up is yellow, for which we must follow the same path as green, but this time up and over the fire spout to the left when we get to the fork. This takes us to a very tricky series of jumps across surfaces both moving and fiery. Survive them, however, and you come to the yellow orb and our mission is complete. The door finally opens, we head inside, and activate the elevator. Our buds Solaire and Soleil sneak up on us to congratulate our success, but soon learn that Gaudius is enacting a solar eclipse above us that is sure to cause trouble. They implore us to make our way to the altar before it's too late, and the pathway to the Moon Kingdom closes forever. So right on up we go. At the top, we find the High Priest collapsed on the ground and help him to his feet. He tells us that the gate to the Moon Kingdom has been opened, and Gaudius now has the power to turn Phantomile, the world the game takes place in if that wasn't clear already, into a world of nightmares. Hupo says it's not too late and we can follow Gaudius into the Moon Kingdom and stop him there. The High Priest agrees to this plan and flies off, but not before giving us a hint that the solar eclipse is making our enemies stronger and to take advantage of them when there's light. I smell a stage gimmick. We head outside and shortly find out exactly what the priest was referring to. When the sunlight fades, any enemies in outdoor areas become completely invincible until the light returns. Inversely, there are platforms that only appear while it's dark. So we're surely in for a bit of darkness, light, darkness toggling. Jan Svankmajer would approve. This environmental state machine naturally creates timers for our interactions where once there were none. We must grab an enemy and toss it into a background switch while it is still light. Then we must make it across a series of platforms while it is still dark, and so on and so forth. It starts off simple enough, and before long we find ourselves back indoors where the enemies are standardly vulnerable like the good Lord intended. This normalcy cannot last, obviously, and we head back outside where we must time a double jump or two between the darkness spiriting away our spherical victims. We activate an elevator and head upward to the next part of the stage where the combinations of light-only enemy grabbing and dark-only platforming get a bit trickier. This part always stuck out to me where you have to wait until it's light so you can grab these new bird enemy types mid-dive bomb and use them to break the armors off these twerps in the back. Save the big guy until later though so you can get those gems. Inside is a tricky jump where we must spring hop past some metal spike enemies to grab a flying moo and double jump to safety. This is probably the first level in the game that the platforming feels gloves off, as in relative mastery of the game's mechanics is expected of you at this point. We alternate between indoors and outdoors, grabbing gems and other goodies along the way until we come to a clever little switch puzzle that at first seems impossible. Like, okay, I hit it with an enemy and opened the path forward, but now I need to double jump up there and there's not enough time to bring an enemy. What gives? Oh wait, I can just hit the switch again and use that. Pretty neat. We continue climbing upward past another elevator where there is a fork in the road. Looks like the only way to reach the path on the left is to double jump, so let's head right for now. This cool little cylindrical set piece shows us the enemy we so desperately need for that aforementioned double jump chilling inside a cage. So we must make our way full circle around the perimeter, flipping all sorts of switches until we can snag his little butt and head back to the unreachable ledge. We're taken to a moving platform where we have to dodge some fire blasts that leads to yet another elevator. Man, how high does this place go? About this high it turns out, because we made it to the top where we run right smack into the big bad evil king of nightmares himself, Gaudius. Gaudius casts a minor aspersion Joka's way, who complains that we're just too strong to be stopped. Klonoa asks Gaudius what his motive for being such a creep is, to which he simply states, revenge. It seems like he was exiled from Phantomile some time ago, and now he's back to remake it to his own liking. He gloats about his successful kidnapping of the diva Lafis from all the way back in Vision 1-2, then waxes on about some nasty thing called the Egg of Destruction before teleporting away. Well, that doesn't sound good. Joka lets us know he's had it with our series of victories over him, and vows to put an end to our heroic deeds once and for all. Wow, check out that seamless cinematic transition into the boss fight. Joka, unfortunately, is not a joke. He might seem a bit on the funny side at first, as all you have to worry about are his ambling antics while you try to aim enemies in between his rotating shield hands, but when the eclipse hits, he transforms into a horrible beast with razor-sharp karate claws. When this happens, you must avoid his swipes and his chops as you turn the blocks of the circular platform you're on back to yellow by walking over each of the discolored ones. But be careful. Some take more than one touch before being completely reset. Having accomplished this, the sun returns and forces the foul creature back into a soft, weak, pointy Joka body. You are then free to commence pelting him with enemy projectiles once again. It's really cool how this Vision's solar eclipse stage gimmick continues into the boss fight here. It adds an elevated narrative heft to the showdown with Joka that none of the previous boss fights have. And if there's one thing I love, it's elevated narrative heft. Joka oscillates between these two modes until you finish draining his life bar, after which he falls back to the roof of the temple and admits defeat. Nevertheless, he warns us that we'll end up in a world of darkness, nightmares, and nothingness, then mournfully screams out the name of his beloved master and promptly explodes. The sincere tone of Joka's pitched up nonsense voice here always struck me as sad. Like, maybe Joka wasn't that bad, maybe he was just a loyal minion, maybe Ghadius just led him astray, Maybe in another phantomile, Joka and Klonoa and Hupo, they could have been like this, yeah? Like this! Regardless of our feelings towards Joka's demise, we are then treated to a lovely full-motion video that shows the Temple of the Sun sucking elemental power from the various locations we've visited throughout the game and uses this energy to dramatically unearth the Moon Kingdom, which was apparently buried in the ground this entire time. Talk about irony. The Moon Kingdom proceeds to float up into the sky where it obviously belongs, only to promptly start pouring nightmare energy out onto the world newly below it. This makes Klonoa very, very angry, but luckily Flying Mama Fish Lady is still around to give us a ride over there so we can give Ghadius what for and put a stop to his evil shenanigans. At long last, we're here, the Moon Kingdom. Pamela, her name's Pamela by the way, drops us off and wishes us luck. A reticent Hupo expresses our need to stop Ghadius, and Klonoa enthusiastically agrees. You may have been expecting rousing, climactic musical accompaniment on our way to the final confrontation, but instead we get this somber, almost serene piece that communicates a buried hint of darkness and danger, especially this part, where the central melody fades away, heightening the ambience of the number. After a brief introductory area, we come to the stage's hub, a cylindrical room with doors leading out of it every which way, though most are currently blocked by monochrome statues. We find a way that's not blocked and ride some jugs across an electrical field, then drop into an area that the keen observer will recognize as the background to the introductory area we passed through just a minute earlier. We double jump up to a red crystal, shatter it with a wind bullet, and observe that the statues of the corresponding color also crumble to dust. Ah, so that's how it works. Exiting the area, we find ourselves back in the cylindrical hub room of the stage with a little more direction than we had previously, namely to find a path that opened up when we destroyed the red statues. Our search takes us to a ring road that perimeters the hub area, down which we quickly find the opened way. One brilliant design touch that I appreciate is how the statues leave these piles of colorful dust behind to indicate where they were standing prior to crumbling. That way you know exactly what pathways have been freshly opened up by your actions, even if you didn't come this way earlier to see the statue pre-destruction with your own eyes. Very intuitive. Also, check out that magical sparkly fairy dust that cascades down from the platform you're on as you run along it. And it makes a magical sparkly sound too. Wow, pretty magical. The de-statued doorway takes us to a side path along the bottom of the hub room that leads us to a ghost-filled chamber where we pass a green statue you'd be remiss not to take mental note of. We then ride a series of small floating platforms where we must contend with some more ghosts to prevent them from knocking us to our doom. What we find at the end of our journey is the blue crystal, which disintegrates blue statues, and before you know it, we're back in the hub. The same magical sparkling ring road takes us to the doorway that was until recently blocked by a blue statue. But wait, what's that yellow statue mean just above it? Entering the doorway, we discover that it leads to a branching path, of which one way is currently open and the other is still blocked off by yellow statues. So the yellow statue above the doorway was a visual reminder to return here later once we've cleared the way. How considerate. The opening path leads to a series of tricky platforming challenges utilizing boomies, but make it through and you find the green crystal. The way you destroy this one is cool. Throw the boomy into the metal spike dude, which causes a boomy below to explode as well, and take the crystal out with them. The devs didn't have to put that in here, but they did it anyways because it's cool. And that's cool. The path leads up through the passageway we mentally noted earlier. Did you? And we go through the floating platform ghost jamboree once more until we're back in the hub for what, like the 4th time at this point? This time, we're on the hunt for the grave of another green statue, and our trusty magical sparkling ring road offers up the goods. This area introduces these geometrical disappearing platforms that just look really cool. I love how they turn into wireframes, and I love how the small ones disappear faster than the large ones just because it feels like they should. This first room serves as a way to acclimate yourself to the function and timing of these platforms' operation in a safer environment before you proceed. In other words, as a hidden tutorial. I'm sure you're sick of hearing me say that by now. The next room, however, throws them at you pretty hardcore, and only when you master them can you destroy the yellow crystal and open up the final pathways of the stage. The next room throws a ghost ambush at us, but nothing too crazy, and soon we're back at the hub once more. Our intuition drives us instinctively back to the ring road, where we see the previously entered blue doorway, with a pile of yellow dust reminders signifying to us helpfully above it. We pass through and our eyes are quickly drawn to even more piles of yellow dust, leading us communicatively to the path forward. Up one last series of disappearing platforms is an elevator, which we reactivate by destroying the crystal that's shielding it. And so we climb to the upper half of the Moon Kingdom above. As soon as we exit the elevator, a moon boy runs towards us shouting Hupo's name. He tells us Gaudius has taken over the kingdom. The queen then enters and adds that he's trapped the Diva Laphis inside an egg and is pouring nightmare energy into it. Hupo responds, referring to the queen as Mother, which rightfully confuses the heck out of Klonoa, and perhaps us. Hupo drops his game-long guise and reveals his true form as the Moon Prince. He disguised himself as a ring spirit to seek help from the outside world. Klonoa is all like, "No worries, bro. I'm sure you had your reasons. It's all cool." Wow, what a chill dude. Hupo transforms back into his ring spirit form, and we set off on our mission to stop Gaudius once and for all. Exiting the elevator room brings us to a ring road similar in style to the one from the previous level, minus the magical sparklies, unfortunately, which makes sense considering we are just higher up in the same building the previous stage took place in. We enter the interior and quickly find a red pillar blocking our path. Looks like some more color-coded obstacles to deal with. Entering the red door brings us to a series of the tiniest platforms you've ever seen in your life. Time for that hover move to shine. And as we start hopping across them, red moves start jumping after us and threatening our platforming success. A few rooms later, we run into these weird yellow dudes with boomerangs lodged in their backs that like to rip the boomerangs out of their backs and throw them at us. More on these guys later, as they will be annoying the crap out of us in just a bit. One giant shield moo and opened barrier later, we find ourselves in a churchy room with a stained glass likeness of Gaudius in the background. Perhaps an ancient warning of the dark occurrences in the present? Or does Gaudius' remodeling team work really quickly? Either way, this room introduces the central mechanic of the vision, timed switch triplets. To progress further, all three must be switched on at once, but take too long and they begin to switch back off. This first one's not too bad though. Double jump to the first switch, land and hit the second, then toss an enemy at the third. Just like that, the red barrier from the hub room opens. A convenient river of sand takes us to a shortcut back to the beginning of the level, where now it is a green pillar that impedes our path forward. An even trickier tiny platform sequence awaits on the opposite side of the green door, followed by a brief vertical ascent powered by giant moves and double jumps. Back outside are some disappearing platforms and boomerang boys, but nothing too taxing for our 11 previous stage-developed skills, and soon enough we're at the next switch triplet. This one's a little more of a thinker. 2 of the 3 switches are in the foreground, so can only be reached by well-aimed enemy tosses. The timing of the moving platform must also be taken into account. As you can see here, this one took me a few minutes of trying before mind and body aligned in glorious synchrony, which then allows us to move forward. Another sand river shortcut, and next is the blue pillar. You know the drill by now. Tiny platforms, boomerang boys, a gate that needs opening, but before we reach the final switch triplet puzzle, we come to what is without a doubt in my mind the most difficult part of the entire game, and the part I alluded to a bit earlier. It looks simple enough. Double jump up to the moving platform, ride it over to the boomerang boy, snag him, and double jump up to the next moving platform / boomerang boy, rinse and repeat. Now, I don't know exactly what it is about this part that is so tricky, but I almost always get stuck here for a little while, missing a jump and falling down the bottom over and over until a very un-Klonoa-like frustration vibe starts to kick in. However, while recording this playthrough, I managed to complete it on my second try, no editing tricks, I promise. Genuinely my best performance ever at this part of the game, so I'm glad to have it captured and preserved for posterity. The final switch puzzle seems completely impossible until you realize you can reach the background switch with a wind bullet and don't actually need to toss an enemy at it. Then it's completely trivial. Cheeky. With the final pillar lifted, we are free to progress to the top of the tower, where we walk in on Gaudius mid-speech talking about the presence of some incorruptible dream preventing him from completely flooding the world with nightmares. Klonoa appears right as he mentions this incorruptible dream, by the way, so I wonder, whomever could he be talking about? Hupo asks Gaudius why he's such an evil dude, and Gaudius states that he's sick of this goody-two-shoes world ignoring nightmares. He doesn't even mind that the nightmare egg he's been incubating will erase him too because, as he states, the world abandoned him long ago. I'd almost feel bad for him if immediately after saying this he didn't try to kill us. The Gaudius boss fight is a neat one. It uses the same inner ring, outer ring stage design motif as Vision 6.1 and 6.2, but this time vertically, so you're actually running along the inside of the ring as it rotates around you. Enemies rain down on you, which you can catch and toss into Gaudius's belly to damage him, and there are also these curious pulsating orbs dotting the path. Touch one of those and you're inconveniently teleported to the outer edge of the ring, where its rotation threatens to cast you into oblivion. To make matters worse, Gaudius laser blasts blue flames at you, which must be hopped over as you make your way to another teleportation orb to get back inside the ring where you can continue damaging Gaudius. He changes up his attack a bit as the fight progresses, but the process stays the same. Snag enemies, toss them into his gut, and drain that life bar. Soon enough, he goes down. Interestingly, there's no post-fight story sequence here. Instead, we are immediately and ominously taken out to the world map with no further information. Peculiar. After saving the game, the story continues. All our friends show up to congratulate us on defeating Gaudius, even Baloo, whom we haven't seen since the very first level. The celebration is soon cut short, however, when Gaudius's disembodied head starts gloating that the Diva Laphis's body has already been taken over by nightmare energy, which will call forth some horrible beast known as Nahatum to destroy the world. Well, the nice good world that we've been fighting throughout the game to preserve and protect anyway. Gaudius laughs so hard his head explodes, and all seems lost until the queen mentions that her ancestors developed a secret weapon that combines the power of all the tribes of Phantomile should this wicked day ever arise. The rest of the crew head up into the skies above, leaving Hupo and Klonoa alone for a brief moment, where Hupo attempts to explain to Klonoa that he is the incorruptible dream Gaudius spoke of earlier, and, as such, number one on Nahatum's world-destroying itinerary. But, there's no time to explain. They flee the collapsing tower and catch up with the others on a magical ring that appears in the sky. Rings are quite the reoccurring motif in this game, aren't they? You even use one as a weapon. If you think about it, they are kind of the perfect structural embodiment of the 2.5D design concept, specifically when laid on their side. I wonder how intentional that is. Anyway, the queen then introduces her secret weapon, the moon cannons. But they must all be loaded and fired together at the same time to be effective. Baloo suggests using inflated enemies to load them. Gee, where would we be without you, Baloo? Nahatum arrives with the swagger of a large, enraged, malevolent purple and pink Humpty Dumpty, and we are hit with the title card. Final Vision. Let's go. At first, snagging an enemy seems to be a difficult task, as most of them are armored, but soon friendly fire from Nahatum's ground smash attack renders them entirely vulnerable. Sheer hubris. And so it goes, snagging de-armored enemies, loading moon canyons, and avoiding the World Dissolver's disgusting chameleon tongue. When you run out of ammunition, don't sweat it. Nahatum will soon fire more creeps out of some nasty spout on his back. When all 5 cannons are loaded, your buds fire them in unison, draining the big boss's entire health bar in one shot. So satisfying. I love the way the sound effects are layered on top of each other. Nahatum doesn't look particularly defeated despite the disintegration of his health bar though, and proceeds to blast away your friends with ease and inhales you into his gaping maw. Phase 2 has you fighting a creepy 4-eyed ghost face inside the dark void of Nahatum's gut. Could this be the evil spirit that informs his actions? Who cares, let's kill it. To help us in this task, the floating face conveniently summons some targets for us to destroy in order to weaken it. Less helpfully, however, he fires corkscrew lasers out of his eyes. Avoid these while navigating the teeter-totter of doom until all 5 gem targets are destroyed, and we got him. The face fades away and we fall into the void below. We somehow appear back outside where Nahatum is looking even gnarlier than before. Balu and the gang come back raring for round 2, so let's load some more moon cannons. This time, they are circling below us, requiring us to fire enemies downward into them via double jumps as opposed to the comparatively simple toss and load process of Phase 1. Nahatum's tricks this time around include scream blasting platforms into dust and firing dangerous rainbow rings out all around him. Once all 5 cannons are loaded, we are treated to another one-shot energy bar drain, and the screen briefly fades to white as we transition to a cutscene. Nahatum looks a little worse for the wear this time around, especially after Klonoa fires Hupo into him one last time and he violently explodes. Unsure as to Hupo's fate, the crew waits in silence until the diva Lafise appears. She thanks them and confirms their victory over the nightmare threat. Hupo reappears in a weakened state, but thankfully Klonoa catches him by the hand before he plummets to his demise. Mission complete. Sometime later, Klonoa and Hupo are discussing their adventure outside of Klonoa's home. A dreariness in the air suggests that, despite their success, all is not well. That's when Hupo drops the bomb. Klonoa does not actually exist in the dream world of Phantomile, but was summoned here by Hupo to help restore the balance of dreams. Klonoa rejects this, stating that he remembers growing up here, a hope Hupo quickly shoots down by explaining that they were false memories that he gave to Klonoa. Furthermore, when Phantomile is renewed by Lafise's Song of Rebirth, remember that? I said it was important. Klonoa will be purged from this reality as he does not really belong here. As if by purposeful insensitivity to Klonoa's mind being blown, Lafise immediately starts singing her reality-purifying ballad, creating a sky vacuum that starts pulling Klonoa up toward it. At first, Hupo tries to maintain the necessity of the situation and does not fight against it, but Klonoa's screaming about how he doesn't want to leave overwhelms his stoicism, and he rushes forward to claim a few more brief moments with his friend before they are separated forever. Klonoa's exit means the world of dreams can now be restored to its former glory, and the golden light of the sun shines on Hupo as life returns to the fields and flowers around him. This transitions to an illustration in a storybook that flips backward through the story as the credits play over it until we get to the front cover of the book where we see that we, ourselves, the player, were its author. It's a surprisingly heart-wrenching finale for a quote-unquote children's game, which I think is a perfect encapsulation of what makes Klonoa tonally stand out so much from its contemporaries. It's not so much a kid's game as a game that helps kids grow, because in many ways, Klonoa's journey is an analog to our own as the player, him being the avatar that we ephemerally embody in a dream world that he and we both soon have to leave. A melancholy reality that applies not just to all the wonderful game worlds we explored in our childhood, but to our childhood itself. That being said, if you can't handle the sadness of letting go just yet, and also want to push your platforming skills to the limit, there is an extra level you unlock once you free all 72 villagers from their bubble prisons. Chronologically, it is set somewhere between Bye Bye Nahatum and Bye Bye Klonoa. In it, Balu is revealed to have completed the tower he was building in dedication to the diva back when we met him in Vision 1-1. That must have taken forever, right? Hey, so that means Klonoa did get to hang out with Hupo and the gang for a decent chunk of time before getting vacuumed up into the sky. Not bad. Oh, but I guess his not grandpa still died, and Klonoa doesn't even know it wasn't his real grandpa yet. Whoops. Anyway, Balu accuses you of having romantic aspirations for his precious Lafise, warns you off from trying to climb his tower that Lafise is apparently already chilling at the top of, then leaps upward and out of sight to join her up there and profess his love. So, to the top we go. Maybe if we're quick enough we can stop the old galoot from making a fool of himself. This is a time attack level that tracks your best time for sick speedrun bro purposes, and it's also the most fiendishly difficult stage in the game. For schmucks! I've played through this game more times than I can count. Just look at me go. Is this actually all my first try, or am I hiding behind the magic of editing like a coward? You decide. Up top, Balu gets brother zoned hard. To further salt his wounds, Lafise re-gifts a music box he made for her to us, which unlocks a BGM player on the level select screen for all of our jamming out needs. And as the camera pulls out, we see Balu reduced to a weeping wreck from this double whammy of heartbreak. Jeez. This game is sad. I hope you enjoyed that commentary playthrough of Klonoa. If you didn't, no worries. I'll be approaching each game featured on Electronic Journeys a little differently depending on what I have to say about it, and the full game commentary playthrough probably won't be a super common format for these videos. There are hundreds of games I'd like to get to after all, and I don't plan to live forever, so. That being said, let's switch gears and talk a little about the development and release of風のKlonoa, Door to Phantomile. Klonoa was directed by Hideo Yoshizawa, previously known for directing the original Ninja Gaiden on the NES. He also directed a lesser-known action RPG a few years later called Radia Senki Reime Hen, which is where a lot of the narrative ideas and even character names he used in Klonoa originally came from. The connection between Klonoa and Ninja Gaiden, however, I think runs even deeper. The way both games fuse cinematic storytelling with relatively basic side-scrolling action. Ninja Gaiden is well famous as one of the pioneers of the video game cutscene, using energetic transitions and realistic dialogue to set the dramatic stakes of the game's scenario. In many ways, Yoshizawa's work on Klonoa feels like a direct continuation of his particular brand of action game storytelling. Strangely, Klonoa originally started as an adaptation of the anime Spriggan, but once the license fell through, the project shifted thematically toward dreams, specifically where they go when they're forgotten. Klonoa's design itself actually came out of an internal design contest at Namco, which artist Yoshihiko Arai won. As for the demographic the developers were targeting with Klonoa's tone, it was a deliberate decision to make something that had appeal to a wide range of ages due to the gamut of more mature titles that were then releasing on the PlayStation, which explains the diverse range of adventure, action, and story elements featured in the game. We wanted a story that wasn't consciously aimed at kids, but would rather be something that could raise kids up to its level, if that makes sense, said Yoshizawa in a recently translated 1997 interview in The PlayStation Magazine. Thanks for the translation, schmublations.com. Design-wise, the emphasis on creatively combining 2D and 3D was there from the very beginning, and Yoshizawa was adamant the 3D not just be for show. The team referred to their approach as information depth, which at its core revolved around the idea that the player should not be paying attention solely to what they're scrolling into, but also the foreground and background. A custom camera system was built to accentuate this concept and communicate it more expressively to the player. A look at the 2.5D platformers that preceded Klonoa make the team's success in this regard blatantly apparent. Games like Clockwork Knight and Pandemonium do next to nothing with their 3D environments by comparison. Nights into Dreams is perhaps the only game released before Klonoa that truly takes advantage of the potential of 2.5D design, but it's less of a platformer than a bizarre side-scrolling racing game. Furthermore, Yoshizawa has explicitly stated that Nights was not an influence on his team's work. Another design goal of Yoshizawa's was to get the game running at 60 frames per second, as he was not a fan of the move to 3D gaming's necessitation of dropping the frame rate to 30 or even lower, which he claimed caused eye fatigue. The team put considerable effort into the game's setting and world building, as they wanted to include a multitude of details the player would not notice on the first playthrough, to give the experience more longevity. They even developed a fake language based around Japanese onomatopoeia to be used by the characters in the game. In terms of mechanics, simplicity was king. The way I see it, human beings can only handle 2 buttons when they're really concentrating, claimed Yoshizawa in a 2012 interview with OneUp.com. And with simplicity also comes a faster game pace. Later in the same interview, Yoshizawa states, "My theme is always to have people understand that tempo and get that graceful feeling and sensation out of it." Curiously, Klonoa is not Namco's first game to feature the concept of inflating enemies to their demise. The company's own 1982 arcade classic Dig Dug tasked the player to do just that. The similarities are coincidental according to Yoshizawa, but I can't help feel that perhaps Dig Dug would have been a better fit for Klonoa's hat than Pac-Man. In regards to the game's memorable ending, while the twist was Yoshizawa's idea, both Arai and designer Tsuyoshi Kobayashi worked to ensure the notion that Klonoa was meant as an avatar for the player themselves was part of its intent. Would you say Klonoa was an avatar for the player himself then? Kobayashi was asked in a 2001 interview. His response? Yes. When Klonoa released in 1997, Yoshizawa had the following sentiment to share. There is some more mature content awaiting players who reach the ending, but that I think is permissible. It's sort of like with movies you loved as a kid. Sometimes when you watch them again as an adult, you realize they had a deeper story going on. It's my hope that kids will experience Klonoa in a similar way. Right now they're enjoying it as a grand old adventure, but I hope they come back to it as an adult too. A touching statement, but Just how was this game that had so much love and passion poured into it by its development team received at the time? Well, I'm happy to report pretty decently as it turns out, with most scores hovering around an 8 or slightly above. The most common criticisms seem to have been that the game was a bit on the short and easy side, which is fair. Though Edge called it generic, which is patently ridiculous if you bother to look even just a millimeter behind its surface mascot platformer trappings. Klonoa also received some flack for being overly cutesy, which I suppose is understandable, but I never really felt that way. I always thought its style had a more wistful or melancholy vibe than cutesy and cuddly. Weird jug-pot baby soldiers notwithstanding, of course. The country with the least tolerance for cuteness appears to be Russia, as the lowest score for the game I could find was from Russian magazine Strana, I have no idea how to say this, Strana IGR, with a measly 5 out of 10. However, American gaming website Game Revolution wasn't far behind with a 6. Speaking of which, brings us to today's review. I have a laptop here. It was hiding this entire time. Alright, Game Revolution. Klonoa, nothing a little penicillin won't fix. A review. These days, you're nobody unless you have a mascot. Nintendo has Mario, Sega has Sonic, Sony has Crash Bandicoot, Snapple has that bottle. Klonoa, door to Phantomile, may be Namco's bid in the mascot wars. After playing Klonoa, I really believe they should instead make their mascot one of the guns from Point Blank or Time Crisis. Why, you ask? Well, go and play Klonoa. If you don't experience nausea from the extremely overdone Japanese-style cuteness, then you've been playing too much with your Barbie and My Little Pony collection. It's true! Old game writing is so funny. So much of old reviews is just like, you're a baby. Oh, it's funny. Klonoa takes place in Phantomile, world far too cute and, fortunately, far, far away. A legend in Phantomile says that the energy from people's dreams is gathered in the Moon Kingdom, and this is why we don't remember our dreams. Is that what it's about? Klonoa, the product of a cat and dog crossbreed, has a dream about a big ship crashing into Ben Hill, and then in parentheses, A Hill? One day a ship actually crashes into Ben Hill, and then in parentheses it says The Hill? This is strange. And Klonoa and his ring spirit Hupo go out to investigate. This is where your adventure begins. Klonoa attacks by shooting wind bullets out of his big ring, which is badly named friend. Like what? It's just bad. Hupo's just a bad name. His badly named friend Hupo lives in. When an enemy is hit, it is inflated like a balloon, and Klonoa carries it over his head in triumph, spinning it around for further humiliation. This bloated corpse can then be used as a projectile weapon or as a booster for your jumps. Klonoa can also flap his huge ears, which have weird finger-like projections. Oh wow, I've played this game so many times, and I've never noticed that his ears are how he hovers. But yeah, I can see it in my head now. That is exactly what happens. Klonoa can also flap his huge ears, which have weird finger-like projections at the end. Oh, they do. That is what they are. That is weird. I'm learning stuff from this. He can do this to slow his descent from jumps. By the end of the game, you learn how to work wonders with these few moves. Graphically speaking, Klonoa is awesome. Klonoa is a pseudo 3D game, which means that all the levels are comprised of polygons, but you travel in a linear path. All of the gorgeous scenery rotates as you travel around the huge levels, creating very impressive visuals. The levels in Klonoa remind me of Mario 64, but without as much freedom. That is just horrible writing. Just what? What about them? What about them reminds you of Mario 64? They're 3D? That's the only thing I can imagine. Anyways, there are parts in most levels where there are branches into the foreground and background, but for the most part, the gameplay is 2D. I also don't... Okay. But if they branch, isn't it still 2D? That sentence doesn't make any sense. This has been a problem for some games. Branches into the foreground and background, but are mostly in 2D, have been a problem for some games. But Namco has perfected this. I think it's trying to say the same general thing that I'm saying, is that the 2.5D is like extra level here, but the wording is very clumsy. Namco has perfected this weird dimensionality. Klonoa runs very smoothly, and at the times you get confused by the depth. And the times you get confused by the depth are few and far between. Klonoa, the character, and all the creatures in the game, aside from the bosses, oh, there's a typo here where it closed a parenthesis, it didn't open, that's pretty funny, are sprite-based. Although this is a bit strange, you don't notice any lack of depth. You don't notice any lack of depth to the characters, despite them being sprite-based. Okay. All of the bosses in the game are a joy to fight because of their creative design, huge size, and graphic quality. This is bad. Once again, the artistry in Klonoa is excellent. The artistry in Klonoa is excellent because of the boss fight's graphic quality. Sound and music in Klonoa are pretty average. Klonoa has its little theme song, but it isn't anything that I'll be humming to myself tomorrow. Not that I hum the Mario. That's really funny. It uses not wanting to hum Klonoa as a sign of quality of its theme song, but then immediately says it doesn't hum the Mario theme either. So it's like, what's the point of comparison if Mario is also not hum-worthy? Anyways, I'd describe the music as fitting of the game. Cute and dream-themed? The music is dream-themed? They just say stuff. The story in Klonoa is advanced by cinematic sequences between and during levels. All of the conversation in Klonoa is comprised of annoying as hell squeaks and distorted human voices. Hupo's voice is especially nerve-wrenching. It's almost exactly like Beaker's voice from Muppet Labs, i.e., meep 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 meep. This is something you definitely want to skip while playing. How can you skip it? Do they mean just skip the cutscenes entirely? That's pretty funny. If that's what they mean, that's really funny. Control and gameplay in Klonoa is right on. The controls are very easy to learn since there are only 2 buttons used and you discover new techniques naturally. The camera angles are almost perfect, so at no time, they're almost perfect. What's the flaw? They're almost perfect. Anyways. So at no time do you ever have to perform leaps of faith. Klonoa plays very much like Super Mario Brothers, but with more variety. There are some levels where you ride on rolling carts and slide down waterfalls. There is also a lot of interaction with things in the foreground and background, so you have to keep on your toes. For the most part, Klonoa is very entertaining, but there are a few drawbacks. For instance, there are many parts in the game that younger players will not be able to finish. More specifically, there are many areas where you need very good hand-eye coordination and timing to progress. This is really a huge problem with Klonoa because it's obvious that the cuteness is geared toward a very young audience, none of whom will be able to get very far into the game. On the other hand, the game is too easy for experienced gamers. There is an extra hard bonus area for aces, but the initial game can be completed in one sitting. There just doesn't seem to be a good audience for Klonoa. They are basing that kids wouldn't be able to play this off of literally nothing. They played a game, it was easy, and then they went, kids won't be able to play this. That's it, for no reason. But here's one thing I will say about this that I think is really interesting, is because thematically, Klonoa was specifically designed to kind of represent like that adolescent period, right? That like, we're old for a kid, not an adult, like that weird in-between phase. The designers have said all sorts of things about really aiming for that. The themes of the story are about that. So even this reviewer who's kind of trying to like insult the game for not having a proper audience, they're kind of inadvertently reinforcing the theme and like the demographic that the game was meant to appeal to, which is that weird in between. So I think that's kind of a sign of the game's success, really, because like even in a critic that's trying to be, derisive, whatever, towards it, they end up also affirming that its themes were integrated successfully, which I find very interesting. All right, moving on. There really isn't anything groundbreaking about Klonoa. We've seen all this stuff in one form or another before. It's all done very well, but this definitely isn't revolutionary. And the cuteness is the best part. And the cuteness. The horrible, horrible cuteness. Here's a taste of it from there's another typo. Here's a taste of it from one of the character descriptions in the instruction manual. Laphise, the legendary diva who can sing the song of rebirth and give life back to the world again. And here are names of some of the enemies. Moo, Zippo, I didn't bother looking most of these up. Spiker, Mew Mew, Boomy, Dabby, and Shelly. And who can forget the kingdom of Jugpot? Ugh, this might not sound too awful, but in combination with the cutesy voices and insipid dialogue where almost everything ends in an exclamation mark, Klonoa can be almost sickening to play. Was this guy really sickened? Was this guy, whatever. Was he sitting there and be like, ooh, I don't know. Maybe he was. Either way, Klonoa Door to Phantomile is a strong contender for the worst named video game of the year, as well as the worst names for in-game characters. Although Star Fox 64 may win that title, Fox McCloud, Slippy, what's Slippy's last name? Slippy's last name. Pepper? That's the Falco? Well, that's about it. Experienced games should rent this puppy before investing the money. But it's definitely worth a try. If you're a parent, this should keep your kid out of your face for a long time. Although it may be too difficult for very young children. Again, just saying stuff. Remember to keep your trigger finger on the mute button. All right. 6 out of 10. Positives. Great visuals. Here's one of the positives. Almost 3D. Oh man, almost. That's really funny. Another positive. Easy to get into. Negative, nothing really new. And here's the final negative, and we'll close the review with this. The final negative, according to GR Staff, I don't think that's his real name. I'm going to throw up now. All right. Well, that was fun. Let's talk about some of the praise Klonoa has earned on its release now instead. GameFan lauded it enthusiastically, if inarticulately, saying, "It's hard to describe how amazing Klonoa really is." IGN, of all places, got to the heart of what makes the game so impressive for its time in a succinct review that reads, "Klonoa is probably the first 2.5D platformer that makes use of classic 2D game elements without sacrificing the versatility of a 3D environment." Although, in the same review, they also refer to 2.5D platformers as an American concept that was started by Clockwork Knight, which makes no sense because Clockwork Knight was made in Japan. So, IGN is still IGN. My favorite bit from that review has got to be, and I quote, "It's overly cute in some ways, but even that's flawless." Like, what does that mean? Okay, a fun little peek into editorial standards in games journalism back in 1998, I guess. Unfortunately, in the years following Klonoa's release, its design and concept did not make much of a splash. True 3D platformers were much more in vogue at the time, which does make sense. But still, it's sad to see such creative and original design work not get picked up by other developers and properly iterated upon. There was Tomba, which released just 2 weeks after Klonoa and is a pretty good game in its own right, but it's quite a different beast to Klonoa, and structurally more like a proper adventure game than an action platformer. Where Tomba and Klonoa most share a likeness is actually in their lukewarm commercial reception and niche cult appeal. There were a smattering of other titles, of course, but nothing that really felt like a step forward. Wild 9 was like a weirdo Western version of Klonoa by Shiny of Earthworm Jim fame, featuring similar enemy-grabbing mechanics. There was also Kirby 64, which may as well have still been in 2D, and that's really all there is to say about it. Klonoa 2 did get a sequel, while excellent, has a very different vibe than the first that I don't like nearly as much. It's much more melodramatically anime, but hey, maybe you're into that kind of thing. Regardless, it's a very good game and very much worth a playthrough for its world-class level designs that, in some ways, I would say even surpass the firsts. One game you should steer well clear of is the remake of Klonoa, simply titled Klonoa. Bafflingly, its designers increased the already generous health point pool from 6 to 10, making the game absurdly easy, and furthermore, they added tutorial signs all over the place, completely invalidating like half the praise I heaped upon the game in my analysis. And that's not even the worst of it. They dubbed in god-awful, cringe-tastic English voice acting. In the immortal words of the AVGN, what were they thinking? Yeah! Not surprisingly, it sold so poorly it put the series into a 14-year hiatus. Fleshing out the franchise is a separate handheld series of games, one on the WonderSwan and two on the Game Boy Advance. They are similar mechanically to Dwarf phantomile, but are focused entirely around puzzle solving. There's also a weird volleyball game on the PS1 and an incredibly boring Japan-only ARPG that I dropped after only a couple of hours. Not an incredible legacy by any means, but that's not to say that vestiges of Klonoa's approach to 2.5D don't still surface in more modern games from time to time, especially once the late 2000s indie scene began bringing side-scrollers back to the mainstream in full force. 2009's Shadow Complex, for example, features similar 2D movement in a 3D space, even allowing the player to fire their gun into the background, albeit very awkwardly. And 2016's much more memorable Inside from Playdead clearly shares Klonoa's information depth design philosophy, a plainly conceivable influence, though I could find no direct evidence in my research citing it as an inspiration. I don't think the 2.5D platformer will ever truly die, but it does seem likely they'll remain a niche within a niche. That being said, it's not like I believe there are huge unexplored depths that are going untapped with them, so it's really not a huge loss that they came and went so quickly, in my opinion. More so, it's very difficult to imagine the Klonoa games ever truly being outdone in their genre, majorly because it's more difficult for small developers to make a proper 2.5D game than a standard 2D one, so there are simply fewer of them. There will likely be a couple passion projects from genre enthusiasts over the coming years, but my honest opinion is that Klonoa will likely remain the single greatest achievement in the genre from now until the end of time. And I mean that. An opinion I would be over the moon to be wrong about, of course, like prove me wrong. Thankfully, they're still easy games to access because in 2022, Namco decided once more to test the waters for Klonoa's commercial appeal and released Klonoa Fantasy Reverie series, high-definition remasters of Klonoa 1 and 2, though to a little apparent fanfare once again. That's okay. I don't need a Klonoa 3, I'm just happy there's still an official way to play these games on modern hardware. As for me, I don't specifically remember the first time I played Klonoa, but I do remember at some point, while working at GameStop in my mid-teens, acquiring a copy of the game, Sans Manual, from one of our neighboring stores. The disc was so scratched up, the opening FMV barely played and would skip horrifically and sometimes freeze altogether, and I'd have to keep trying. I can still hear the opening music skipping violently in my head to this very day. I'm embarrassing myself. It actually may have been one of the games I tried the infamous toothpaste trick on back in those days, but I'm not 100% sure about that one. I'm not even 100% sure if that trick ever worked for me, but I definitely tried it a few times. Probably destroyed a game or two that I've put out of my mind over the years. Regardless, I loved the game, I loved Klonoa, and probably cleared it half a dozen or so times as a teenager. It's definitely a 5-star game for me and probably in my top 10 games on the entire PlayStation. By the way, I'll be ranking and tracking all the games I feature on Electronic Journeys by various parameters: year, platform, genre lineage, and so forth. But as this is my first episode, I believe you can imagine why such an endeavor would be pointless at this exact moment. I haven't even come up with a name for the segment yet. Classification Corner, Rapid Ranking, Favy Gamey. As an aside, I liked the second Klonoa so much, it was one of maybe only 5 or so games I brought with me when I moved away to college. In my wise old age, however, I have reverted to preferring the original. As for you guys, I recommend, if you are able, to play Klonoa in its original form on the PS1. The modern remaster is decent for sure, if that's not an option. At the very least, it undoes the health point, voice acting, and tutorial sign changes that the awful Wii version introduced. It should go without saying that you'd be better off steering entirely clear of that particular release. While I don't think the Fantasy Reverie version of Klonoa 1 controls quite as well as the PlayStation OG, it's definitely not bad. I do greatly prefer the original 2D sprites in a 3D world art style to the fully 3D modern take on it though. Regardless of which of the two you play, Klonoa's design holds up incredibly well, and I don't think has aged in the slightest, which is certainly not praise you can give honestly to most PlayStation 1 games. Well, So closes our debut episode and our coverage on風のKlonoa, Door to Phantomile, a masterfully designed game sparkling with the fullness of artful creation that perfectly encapsulates the melancholic quiet of transitional adolescent being, and a work of inspiring craftsmanship more than worthy of inaugurating the Electronic Journeys video game canon. So long, everyone. We'll meet again soon on another journey. Those of you that watched through to the end and are hearing me say these words right now, thank you very, very much. If you want to support our efforts with the Electronic Journeys project, the most important thing you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share the show with your family and friends. Like I said in the video, there are literally hundreds of games I want to get to on this show, and I won't be able to do it without your support. Eventually, we'll be opening up the channel to memberships and have tons of exclusive content planned for the days ahead. Live streams, Q&As, bonus reviews, etc. If you're looking for more direct ways to support the show now, I'm actually an app developer by trade and have several apps in the iOS App Store you can check out. Sorry, no Android, I never learned how to code for it. There's Punchline, a collaborative joke writing app that's kind of like a never-ending game of Cards Against Humanity. Nonogram Infinity, a puzzle action game that fuses my loves of Picross and the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard into one glorious fusion. And finally, The Last Will of Sergei Kurbsky, a puzzle box app that, as far as I know, no one has ever solved. I do have some one-star reviews complaining that the game makes no sense, though. It'd be kind of cool if someone that watches Electronic Journeys does eventually solve it. Also, you can support me by purchasing a copy of my poetry book, Useless Musings, from Amazon. I know what you're thinking poetry, but a lot of it's funny and silly. It's not super serious. There are some depressing ones, but a lot of it's very goofy. It was my pandemic project. It's what kept me sane over COVID. So yeah, those are some ways you can support me and the show now. All right, that's it. Thanks again. We will be back soon with episode 2.